At 73 years old, I realized that fate was giving me one last chance to live for myself. All my life, I worked for others. First for patients at the clinic, then for my family, and now it's time to think about myself. My name is Winston Pendragon, and I recently bought a house in Salford, a small town 3 hours drive from where I have spent my entire life. I used to consider myself a good therapist. I could see right through people and predict future problems from the slightest signs in the present. I had an almost mystical connection with my patients. Dr. Pendragon, you can see right into my soul, grateful people would tell me, but I never managed to understand my own son. Barnaby was born when I was 43, and Ophelia was 38. A late child, he was long awaited, prayed for, and suffered for after several failed attempts and years of hope. We spoiled him immensely. A child born of great love and prosperity had every chance of growing up to be a decent person. He's special, Ophelia would say, looking at our son, who had failed his literature exam for the seventh time. He's just different. He needs time to find himself, she would convince me when Barnaby dropped out of his third college at 22, wasting our money and his time. Everyone makes mistakes, she whispered when, at 25, he brought home two lazy friends and they threw a party that required repairs to the living room. I love my wife. I loved her so much that I was willing to put up with her blindness regarding our son. You're too hard on him, she would say resentfully when I refused to give Barnaby money yet again. And I would give in because I couldn't bear to see her sad eyes. Ophelia died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, discovered too late. She wasted away in a month. I held her hand until her last breath, and then I couldn't let go for a long time, as if I could keep her soul close to me. Take care of Barnaby, she said before she died. He's not as strong as you are. I promised, of course I promised, but something inside me broke. As she was dying, she was still thinking about him, not about how I would live alone. After the funeral, Barnaby came to see me every week. I expected him to try to support me, his father who had lost the love of his life. But every visit ended with a request for money. His car broke down, he couldn't pay the rent, he lost his job again. Around that time, Imogen came into his life. She worked as an administrator at the hotel where Barnaby got a temporary job as an assistant. Tall, with a piercing gaze, she was 5 years older than my son and knew exactly what she wanted out of life. But most importantly, she knew how to achieve it. "Dad, meet my girlfriend," Barnaby said, bringing her to my house 2 weeks after they met. Imogen was the epitome of politeness. She said all the right things about my loss, admired the house, and took an interest in my career. But I could see how predatory she was as she surveyed the surroundings, assessing the value of each item. "Your son has told me a lot about you, Dr. Pendragon. He admires you so much," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I sensed something was off right away. In 30 years of medical practice, I had learned to recognize fake smiles. But Barnaby looked at her with such adoration that I said nothing. 3 months later, they were married. No wedding, just a civil ceremony at City Hall. Barnaby called me that evening and told me as if it were nothing important. "By the way, Dad, Imogen and I got married today. She said, why spend money on a lavish celebration when it's better to invest it in the future?" Perhaps I should have been more wary then, but instead I felt relieved. My son had finally found a woman who would set him on the right path. Maybe he would stop loafing around and get his act together. But it turned out differently. Imogen quit her job at the hotel a week after the wedding. "Why should I work for peanuts when Barnaby's about to get a good job?" she said when I asked her about it. Of course, there was no job in sight. Barnaby was barely coping with his duties as a technical support employee at a company that sold household appliances. They began to visit my home more and more often. Barnaby asked for money as usual, and Imogen methodically studied my life as if looking for a weak spot. I gave them money even though everything inside me resisted. The promise I had made to Ophelia weighed on me like a chain. One day, Imogen brought up the subject of the house. "Winston," she said, calling me by my first name for the first time, "why do you need such a big house? You live alone. Barnaby and I are crammed into a rented apartment. This is the house where Ophelia and I lived. Every corner here holds memories of her," I replied. "But you have to let go of the past," she objected, with false concern in her voice. I didn't answer. But that night I couldn't sleep, thinking about her words. Maybe she was right. I was indeed clinging to the past, living among ghosts. The house seemed huge and empty without Ophelia. The next day, an old friend, a former colleague who now worked at a hospice, called me. He was looking for a part-time consulting physician. Winston, you need to come out of your shell. Since Ophelia's death, you've become completely withdrawn. I agreed, and that decision changed everything. Returning to work, even if only part-time, was like coming back to life. Contact with people, the feeling of being useful, all this brought me back to life. I also met a patient there who, at the age of 90, decided to sell his house and move to a small town to meet death in a new place without the burden of memories. His words touched something inside me. I suddenly understood what my friend meant when he talked about the shell. The house that had once been a happy place for Ophelia and me had turned into a museum of the past. I walked through the rooms, talked to the ghost of my wife, and looked through old photographs. It was not a life, but an existence. The decision came unexpectedly. I put the house up for sale and started looking for a new place to live. Realtors showed me different options, but nothing caught my attention, until I happened to see an ad for a house for sale in Sulphur. The town attracted me with its name. Sulphur means sulfur in English. Ophelia always joked that we were like sulfur and oxygen, separately poisonous, but together we created something necessary for life. It seemed like a sign to me. The house turned out to be perfect. 2 stories with a wide porch and a yard where I could plant a garden, spacious enough not to feel cramped, but not so big that I would get lost in it. And most importantly, no ghosts from the past. I bought it for $2 million, and almost all the money from the sale of the house Ophelia and I had owned. I didn't say anything to Barnaby and Imogen. I knew they wouldn't approve. Or rather, Imogen wouldn't approve. She always thought I should help them financially, not spend money on myself. When I finally told my son about my decision, the reaction was predictable. Barnaby was silent, and Imogen did not hide her disappointment. "And how much money do you have left after this purchase?" she asked bluntly. "Enough to live comfortably," I replied evasively. "What about us? You promised to help us with the down payment on the apartment." She reminded me of a conversation that never happened. I remained silent. At that moment, I finally realized that all these years, I had been nothing more than a wallet to them, a source of funds, not a living person with my own desires and dreams. "When are you moving?" Barnaby asked without looking me in the eye. "In 2 weeks. I want to start a new life," I replied, feeling a strange sense of relief at my decision. "A new life? At 73? Imogen snorted, but immediately put on a caring expression. "Winston, are you sure you can manage on your own in a new place? Maybe you need help with the move." I refused, saying that I had hired a team of movers. In fact, I wanted to do everything myself, sort through my belongings, decide what to take with me to my new life and what to leave behind. Of Ophelia's belongings, I took only her favorite shawl, a photo album, and the silver ring she wore on her thumb. I gave the rest to her sister and friends. I decided not to take any furniture. I wanted to furnish my new home from scratch. Before leaving, I said goodbye to my neighbors, closed all my accounts, and took care of the formalities. And on my last night in my old house, I dreamed of Ophelia. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling. "You're doing the right thing, Winston," she said. "I'll always be with you, wherever you are. But you need to move on." I woke up with my eyes wet from tears, but my heart felt light, as if I had received her blessing. The house in Sulphur was waiting for me, a new home for a new life. I was going to take up gardening, maybe get a dog, renew old friendships with colleagues I had lost touch with after retiring. I had plans for the first time in 3 years, plans that were not tied to the past but focused on the future. I didn't know that these plans would soon be destroyed, that my own son and his wife would turn my new dream into a nightmare, that the house I had bought for a peaceful retirement would become a battlefield. But then, leaving my old house early in the morning, I was full of hope and anticipation. "Goodbye," I said to the house that had witnessed 30 years of happy life and 3 years of grief. "Thank you for everything." I got in the car and drove toward a new life, unaware of the trials that awaited me ahead. The drive to Sulphur took almost 4 hours. I took my time, stopping at roadside cafes and enjoying the scenery. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. No one was waiting for me, and I had nowhere to rush to. It was just me, the road, and a future that I could shape as I saw fit. The town of Sulphur turned out to be exactly as I had imagined it. Small, with only about 5,000 inhabitants. The main street was shops, cafes, a post office, and a library. Neat houses on quiet streets, no big city hustle and bustle, no anonymity. Everyone knew each other here, but at the same time respected each other's personal space. My new home was at the end of a cul-de-sac, adjacent to a small forest. The last in a row of 5 similar houses, it looked a little isolated from the rest. Perhaps that was why it had been on the market for so long. People didn't like living on the edge. They preferred to be at the center of things. I parked my car in the driveway and just sat there for a while, looking at my new home. A 2-story red brick house with white shutters. A spacious veranda surrounded the house on 3 sides. The garden was well kept but a little overgrown, and there were no neighbors on the right, just the forest rustling in the wind. The realtor, Esme Belgrave, was waiting for me at the entrance. A tall woman in her 60s with short-cropped gray hair and a sharp gaze. She sold me this house over the phone and by email. I didn't even come to see it, relying on the photos and video tours she sent me. Now looking at her, I somehow remembered an old joke about a wolf who sold a house with a catch. But I dismissed the thought as absurd. The house looked exactly like the photos. No deception. "Welcome to your new home, Dr. Pendragon," Esme greeted me, extending her hand for a handshake. Her grip was as strong as a man's. "I hope the trip didn't tire you out?" "No, I enjoyed every minute of it," I replied honestly. "Great. Let me give you the keys and show you around so you know all the features of the house." We went inside. The house smelled of fresh paint and wood polish. Esme had made sure everything looked perfect for my arrival. The first floor included a spacious living room with a fireplace, a dining room, a kitchen, a study, and a guest bathroom. The second floor had a master bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, 2 smaller guest bedrooms, and another bathroom. The basement was dry and clean, perfect for storage or setting up a workshop. The water here comes from an artesian well. It's very clean, but it has a small amount of sulfur in it, which is where the town gets its name, Esme explained as we looked around the kitchen. Sometimes it can smell like hydrogen sulfide, especially if the water has been sitting for a long time. But it's completely safe and even good for you. I nodded, not thinking much of it. After all, I'm a doctor, and I know that small amounts of hydrogen sulfide in water are indeed harmless, and are sometimes even used for medicinal purposes. Another feature of this area is periodic gas emissions from the soil. Esme continued casually, showing me how the heating system works. "It's nothing to worry about. Just sometimes there might be a smell of rotten eggs. This is due to the geological structure of the area. There are sulfate deposits beneath us." "Does this happen often?" I asked, beginning to understand why the house had been on the market for so long. No, very rarely. Maybe a couple of times a year, and even then it doesn't last long. Just air out the room and it will go away," Esme assured me with a smile. "It's mentioned in the contract in the section on the natural features of the area. Remember?" I nodded, although, to be honest, I didn't remember that clause. But on the other hand, the smell of hydrogen sulfide didn't scare me. I had encountered much more unpleasant smells in the hospital. "Well, I think we're done with the formalities," Esme said, handing me a set of keys. "Welcome to Sulphur, Dr. Pendragon. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. You have my business card." When Esme left, I walked around the house again, now alone, getting used to the idea that this was my new home. The empty rooms waited for me to fill them with my life. The feeling of starting with a clean slate was both frightening and exciting. I unloaded the car, bringing in the few things I had brought with me. The rest was to be delivered the next day. The bed, sofa, tables, and chairs I had ordered from an online furniture store. On the first night, I slept on an air mattress in the master bedroom. As I fell asleep, I listened to new sounds. The creaking of the floorboards, the rustling of leaves outside the window, the distant barking of a dog. Everything was unfamiliar, strange, but strangely soothing. There were no ghosts of the past here, no painful memories, only the present and the future. In the morning, I was awakened by the ringing of the phone. It was Barnaby. I hadn't answered his calls all day yesterday, and he was probably starting to worry. Or more likely, he needed money urgently. "Dad, are you in the new house yet?" he asked instead of saying hello. "Yes, I arrived yesterday," I replied, stifling a yawn. "How is it? Was it worth the money?" There was a strange mixture of curiosity and disapproval in his voice. More than that, the perfect house in the perfect location. "Great," Barnaby said without enthusiasm. "Listen, Dad, we have a little problem here." Here we go, I thought. Now the usual story about a broken car or overdue rent will begin. "We need to move out of the apartment. The landlord has decided to sell the house, and we have to vacate within a month," Barnaby said quickly. "Imogen and I were thinking, maybe we could come stay with you? Not for long, just until we find something suitable." I closed my eyes, feeling my jaw muscles tense. So that's it. They want to live with me in my new house. The house I bought to start a new life. Without them. "Barnaby, I just moved. I don't even have any furniture yet," I began, trying to find a polite way to refuse. "That's no problem, Dad. We can bring our own. We have a fold-out sofa and some kitchen utensils." "That's not the point," I faltered, not knowing how to explain to him that I didn't want them here, that I had bought this house precisely to get away from their constant request for money. "Dad, we really have nowhere else to go. You're not going to leave your own son out on the street, are you?" His voice took on the pleading tone he always used when he wanted something. I sighed. The promise I had made to Ophelia weighed heavily on my shoulders again. Take care of Barnaby. But was it really caring to allow a grown man to continue behaving like a child? "All right," I said finally, already knowing I would regret it. "But only for a couple of weeks, and you'll have to find another place to live." "Of course, Dad. Thank you so much. You saved us," Barnaby exclaimed with such sincere joy that for a moment I almost believed his gratitude. "We'll come this weekend, okay?" "Okay," I agreed, feeling my dreams of a peaceful new life crumble before my eyes. After talking to my son, I sat on the floor of the empty bedroom for a long time, staring out the window at the quiet street. Something told me that this decision would change everything, that by agreeing to let Barnaby and Imogen into my home, I had opened Pandora's box. But it was too late. They would be coming this weekend. All I could do was hope that their stay would indeed be temporary. The move turned out to be not as difficult as I had expected. The truck with my new furniture arrived right on time. Two strong guys quickly and carefully carried everything into the house, assembled the bed, sofa, and dining table without asking unnecessary questions or trying to engage me in conversation. I appreciated their professionalism. At my age, you begin to appreciate people who just do their job well, without unnecessary chatter. Esme Belgrave stopped by the day after I arrived, ostensibly to check if everything was okay. I suspected that she was actually curious about how I was settling in. In small towns, everyone is interested in new residents. "How was your first night in your new home, Dr. Pendragon?" she asked, taking a cup of tea from my hands. We sat on the porch, enjoying the warm autumn day. "Very peaceful," I replied. "Unusually quiet after the big city." "Oh yes, you'll definitely be able to relax here, away from the hustle and bustle of the city." Esme nodded. "Although sometimes there are sounds." "Sounds?" I asked, alert. "Nothing supernatural," she laughed, noticing my expression. "Just geological activity. As I mentioned yesterday, there are sulfate deposits beneath us. Sometimes they release gases. It can sound like the earth is sighing, and there's a smell, of course. But it's rare, really. I'm not afraid of strange smells," I smiled. "In medicine, you get used to worse things." Esme nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly why I thought you were the perfect buyer for this house. Other people are too superstitious. There was one potential buyer, a builder, who left as soon as he heard the first sigh from the basement. But it's just a natural phenomenon. Like the geysers in Yellowstone, only smaller and safer." I nodded, although the comparison seemed strange to me. The geysers in Yellowstone were quite dangerous. But I decided not to dwell on that. After all, Esme was not a geologist, just a real estate agent. "By the way, if you need help around the house or in the garden, I can recommend some local guys," she continued, finishing her tea. "They're inexpensive and do good work." "Thanks, but I'm managing on my own for now," I replied. "Physical activity is good at my age." Esme looked at me intently. "You came alone. Did your family stay in the city?" "I only have a son and his wife," I said. but they have their own lives. I understand, Esme nodded, and something like sympathy flashed in her eyes. My children have also scattered. One is in Europe, the other on the West Coast. We see each other once a year if we're lucky. We talked a little about children, how quickly they grow up and how difficult it is to accept their choices, especially when they seem wrong. Esme turned out to be a good conversationalist, and I even felt a little sorry when she got ready to leave. I won't keep you from settling in any longer, she said, getting up. But if you need anything or have any questions, call me anytime. I thanked her and walked her to the gate. When Esme left, I went back into the house and continued unpacking boxes. I didn't have many things, mostly books, some dishes, clothes. I deliberately got rid of most of the items that reminded me of my past life. I wanted to start with a clean slate. In the early days, I enjoyed the solitude and silence. I ate breakfast on the porch, listening to the birds singing. I walked around the neighborhood, getting to know the town and its residents. Selford turned out to be a pleasant place. Quiet, clean, with friendly people who greeted strangers on the street. It was nothing like the big city where I had spent my whole life. In the evenings, I read or watched old movies on the new TV that had been installed in the living room. Sometimes I went out on the porch with a glass of wine and just sat there watching the stars. There were many more stars here than in the city, where the lights and advertisements obscured the heavenly bodies. On about the fourth day, I noticed the smell Esme had mentioned for the first time. I woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that the room smelled like rotten eggs. It wasn't strong, but it was unpleasant enough to wake me up. I opened the window, aired out the bedroom, and went back to sleep, deciding to deal with the problem in the morning. In the morning, the smell was gone. I went down to the basement, checked all the pipes and vents. Nothing suspicious. I remembered Esme's words about sulfate deposits and decided that it was indeed just a natural phenomenon. After all, she had warned me about it. On the fifth day after the move, when I was already getting used to my new home and new rhythm of life, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any guests and was surprised to see Barnaby and Imogen standing on the doorstep with suitcases. "Surprise!" Barnaby exclaimed with a broad smile. "We decided to come for the weekend to see you in your new home." Imogen stood next to him with a forced smile. She looked around the house with an appraising gaze, as if estimating its value. "You could have warned me," I said, not hiding my surprise. "But then it wouldn't have been a surprise," Barnaby replied, squeezing past me into the house. "Wow, it's really beautiful here. And spacious." Imogen followed him, taking off her coat as she walked. "I hope we're not disturbing you, Winston," she said in that special tone she used when she wanted to sound caring. "We just missed you so much, and we wanted to see your new home." I doubted the sincerity of their words, but I was still glad to see my son. Despite all our differences, I loved him. He was my flesh and blood, the only child of the woman I loved more than anything in the world. "Come in," I said, closing the door. "I'll show you the house." I gave them a short tour. Barnaby seemed genuinely interested, asking questions and admiring the view from the windows. Imogen hid her disappointment behind false compliments. "It's nice," she said when we finished the tour. "A little less than I expected for $2 million, but cozy." "I have enough space here," I replied. "Besides, I appreciate the tranquility of this neighborhood." "You could buy a penthouse in the city center for that money," Imogen remarked. "I don't need a penthouse," I replied calmly. "I need a place where I can enjoy peace and quiet in my twilight years." "Don't say that, Dad," Barnaby interjected. "You'll outlive us all." I said nothing. I didn't want to argue in the first few minutes of their arrival. "Are you hungry?" I asked, changing the subject. "I can make lunch." "That would be great," Barnaby said happily. "Can we settle in for now? Which room should we stay in?" I showed them to one of the guest bedrooms. It was small, with a double bed and a wardrobe. Nothing fancy, but perfectly adequate for a short visit. "I hope you'll be comfortable," I said. "Make yourselves at home while I get started on dinner." In the kitchen, cutting vegetables for a salad, I thought about Barnaby and Imogen's sudden appearance. Something about their arrival alarmed me. Too many suitcases for a weekend. Too much attention to detail in the house. Too many questions about neighbors and locals. I decided to be on my guard. After all, I knew my son. He never did anything for no reason. Behind every selfless act of his, there was always a hidden motive. Lunch was relatively peaceful. Barnaby talked about his job in technical support, complaining about customers and his bosses. Imogen was mostly silent, only occasionally interjecting with caustic remarks about how her husband was underappreciated. If he were given a chance, he would show what he is capable of, she said, looking at me reproachfully, as if I were to blame for Barnaby's failures. Honey, Dad's not to blame for my boss being an idiot, Barnaby gently rebuked her. Let's not talk about work. Tell us, Dad, how are you getting on in Salford? Have you made any friends yet? I told them about my first few days here, how I had explored the town, about my pleasant neighbors, and my plans to take up gardening. Sounds a bit boring, Imogen remarked, poking at her salad with her fork. No entertainment, no cultural life? Books and movies are enough for me, Nuss, I replied. At my age, noise and bustle are exhausting. After lunch, Barnaby volunteered to wash the dishes, and I went out onto the porch to be alone for a while. A few minutes later, Imogen joined me. It's a beautiful view, she said, looking at the forest behind the house. Although it's a little eerie, especially at night, I suppose. I like it, I replied. It reminds me that nature is always close by. Imogen lit a cigarette and blew smoke toward the forest. You know, Winston, Barnaby and I are going through a difficult time right now, she began, and I tensed up inside. Here we go, I thought. Now the conversation about money will begin. Barnaby hasn't told you, of course, but he was laid off from his job. It's been 2 weeks now. He hasn't mentioned it, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. He's proud, just like you. Imogen smiled. He doesn't want to admit failure. But things are really bad. We're barely making ends meet. We can't pay the rent. Our credit cards are maxed out. And that's why you came to me? I asked bluntly. Imogen looked offended. Don't be silly, Winston. We came to visit you, to make sure you were all right. We're family. Families should stick together, especially in difficult times. I didn't answer. Imogen was clearly leading up to something, and I decided to let her finish. Actually, she continued after a pause, we were thinking, maybe we should move here, to Salford. It's definitely cheaper to live here than in the big city. Barnaby could find remote work, and I could figure something out too. It's hard to find work in a small town, I remarked, especially well-paid work. Yes, but if we lived here, with you, we could help you around the house, and you could, well, help us with the rent until we get on our feet. So that's it. They wanted to live with me, more precisely at my expense. Now I understand why they had so many suitcases. Imogen, I began cautiously. I moved here to start a new life, a quiet life. I'm not sure I'm ready to live with someone else under the same roof again. But you're alone, Winston, she objected emphatically. It's dangerous to live alone at your age. Anything could happen. We could look after you. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself, I replied firmly. And I have neighbors who will always help me if I need it. Imogen looked disappointed, but quickly pulled herself together. Of course, it's your decision. I was just suggesting an option that could be beneficial for all of us. Think about it. She stubbed out her cigarette and went into the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. In the evening, Barnaby suggested we watch a movie together. We settled down in the living room in front of the TV. Barnaby sat down next to me on the sofa, and Imogen settled into an armchair. We were watching some comedy, but I couldn't concentrate on the plot. Thoughts of my conversation with Imogen kept me awake. In the middle of the movie, I smelled hydrogen sulfide. At first it was faint, barely noticeable, but it gradually grew stronger. What's that smell? Imogen grimaced, pinching her nose. It's like something's gone bad. It's a natural phenomenon, I explained. It's related to the geological structure of the area. Sulfate deposits under the house sometimes release gases. And you bought the house knowing that? Barnaby asked in surprise. It's rare, I said, and completely safe. Let's open the windows and air out the room. We opened the windows, and after a few minutes the smell did indeed begin to disappear. But the mood was ruined. Imogen looked unhappy. Barnaby looked concerned. Maybe we should have the house checked, he suggested. What if it's a gas leak or something? The house was inspected before it was sold, I assured him. Everything is fine. It's really just a natural phenomenon. The realtor warned me about it. And you bought the house anyway? Imogen asked incredulously. For $2 million? I like this house, I replied simply, and the smell is rare and dissipates quickly. I can live with that. We finished watching the movie, but the atmosphere was no longer so relaxed. After the movie, Barnaby and Imogen went to their room, and I stayed in the living room, thinking about the situation. The next morning, I got up early as usual and went for a run. When I returned, Barnaby and Imogen were already having breakfast in the kitchen. They looked too at home, too comfortable, as if they had always lived there and hadn't just arrived yesterday. "Good morning, Dad," Barnaby greeted me. "We found eggs and bacon in the fridge. I hope you don't mind that we made breakfast?" "Of course not," I replied, pouring myself some coffee. "Your guess." "Oh, by the way," Barnaby said casually, "Imogen and I have decided to stay a couple more days if you don't mind. It's so rare to get out of the city. We want to enjoy the fresh air and quiet." I looked at him closely. Barnaby avoided my gaze, concentrating on buttering his toast. "I thought you were only coming for the weekend," I said. "Well, yes, but Imogen took a week's vacation and well, you know I was laid off, so I'm free." So he knew that Imogen had told me about his dismissal, and yet he hadn't bothered to talk to me about it himself. "A couple of days," I agreed, "but no more than that. I have my own plans for this week." "Of course, Dad," Barnaby said happily. "We won't get in your way, I promise." After breakfast, they left for town, supposedly to buy groceries. I was left alone and used the time to work in the garden. I was loosening the soil, preparing the flower beds for spring planting, when I noticed a strange depression at the far corner of the house. It looked as if the ground had sunk a little. I walked closer and saw a small crack in the foundation. Nothing serious, but still unpleasant. In the evening, when Barnaby and Imogen returned, I noticed that they had brought back much more than they needed for a couple of days. Several bags of clothes, some books, even Imogen's favorite pillow, which I recognized by its distinctive blue cover. They settled into the living room as if they were at home. Barnaby was watching TV, sprawled out on my couch. Imogen was flipping through a magazine, her feet up on the coffee table. I felt irritated, but I held back. "Just a couple of days," I reminded myself. "They'll be gone in a couple of days." But a week passed, and Barnaby and Imogen had no intention of leaving. Every time I hinted at their departure, they found a reason to stay for another day or two. Imogen had a headache. Barnaby needed to finish a project on the computer. The forecast promised rain, and they decided to wait out the bad weather. I felt them gradually filling my house with their presence, their things, their habits. Their toothbrushes and cosmetics appeared in the bathroom. In the kitchen, there were their groceries and dishes, which they had brought with them for some reason. In the living room, there were their magazines, books, and even framed photographs. It was as if they were putting down roots, slowly but surely claiming rights to my home, my personal, hard-earned piece of happiness. And I began to understand that this was not just a spontaneous trip. It was a carefully planned takeover. 2 weeks. 2 weeks had passed since Barnaby and Imogen showed up at my doorstep with their suitcases. And with each passing day, they behaved more and more like they owned the place, gradually pushing me out of my own space. The first sign was the rearrangement of the living room. I came back from a walk and found that my favorite leather sofa was now against the wall instead of by the window, where I had placed it. "It's much more comfortable to watch TV this way," Imogen explained when I expressed my dissatisfaction. "Besides, there won't be any sun glare on the screen." "But I like sitting by the window and looking at the garden," I objected. "Dad, you can sit in the armchair by the window," Barnaby interjected with that special tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "The sofa's better where Imogen put it." I gave in. After all, it was just furniture. I told myself that it wasn't worth arguing over such trifles, that they would soon leave and I would be able to arrange everything to my liking again. But they didn't leave, and there were more and more changes. Their photos appeared on the walls. Their food took up all the space in my refrigerator, leaving almost no room for my favorite yogurts and fruits. The bathroom turned into an exhibition of Imogen's cosmetics, and my simple toiletries were now crammed onto the edge of the shelf. They made friends with the locals, introducing themselves as if they also lived here permanently. "My father and I recently moved to Salford," Barnaby would say to neighbors when he met them on the street. "We wanted him to spend his twilight years in a peaceful place." I was repulsed by these words, by the condescending tone with which he spoke of me, as if I were a frail old man in need of constant supervision. The tension was mounting. I increasingly caught them whispering, which stopped when I entered the room. Imogen often talked on the phone, but she would stop as soon as I approached. Something was brewing, and it didn't bode well for me. That morning, the smell of hydrogen sulfide was particularly strong. It woke me up, and I immediately realized that it was another gas leak under the house. This was the third time in 2 weeks, more often than Esme had promised, but still not often enough to be considered a serious problem. I opened the windows, aired out the room, and went down to the kitchen to make coffee. Barnaby and Imogen were already sitting there, talking quietly about something. When I entered, they fell silent and exchanged glances. "Good morning," I said, sensing the tension in the air. "Good morning," Imogen replied with a forced smile. "That awful smell again. How can you live in such conditions, Winston?" "It's temporary," I replied, pouring coffee. "It will air out soon." "Temporary?" Imogen raised her eyebrows skeptically. "This is the third time in 2 weeks. It's not temporary, it's a constant problem. The realtor warned me about it," I said. "I knew what I was getting into when I bought the house." "And you still paid $2 million for a house that stinks of rotten eggs?" Barnaby asked mockingly. "Dad, you've clearly been ripped off." I shrugged. "I like this house, and the smell isn't that frequent. But when it happens, it's just unbearable," Imogen said. "Barnaby and I couldn't sleep all night because of the stench." "Well then, maybe it's time for you to go back to the city," I suggested, looking her straight in the eye, "since it's so unbearable here." Imogen and Barnaby exchanged glances. I sensed that the moment they had been waiting for had arrived. "Actually, Dad, we wanted to talk to you," Barnaby began, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "Imogen and I have discussed a lot over the past 2 weeks. Really." I took a sip of coffee, preparing myself for what was to follow. "Yes," Barnaby took a deep breath. "We think you should move back to the city. This house, it's too big for you alone. And there are the odor issues and the remoteness from civilization. At your age, you need to be closer to good hospitals and social infrastructure." I remained silent, watching my son awkwardly choose his words to say what he and Imogen had already decided. "We found a great option," Imogen chimed in with an enthusiasm that seemed fake to me. "The Golden Autumn Residence for seniors. They have medical staff, 3 meals a day, entertainment programs. You'll like it there, Winston." "A nursing home?" I asked calmly. "Are you suggesting I move into a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home," Barnaby hastily objected. "It's a residence for active retirees. There are lots of people your age there, and you'll be able to socialize and make new friends." "What will happen to this house?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Well, Imogen and I could live here," Barnaby said, trying to sound casual. "We would take care of the house and keep it in good condition. And we would take care of the smell problem," Imogen added. "Barnaby has already found a company that specializes in ventilation and air purification." I looked at them silently, trying to comprehend the audacity of their proposal. They wanted to take my house, the house I had bought for myself with money I had earned through decades of honest work, and send me to a residence for active retirees. "No," I finally said. "This house is mine. I bought it for myself, and I'm not going anywhere." Barnaby sighed as if he had expected this response. "Dad, be reasonable. You're 73 years old. You can't live alone in such a big house, especially with problems like these gas emissions." "I can," I replied firmly, "and I will. And it's time for you and Imogen to go back to the city. You've been staying with me for 2 weeks, and that's enough." Imogen stood up abruptly. "Winston, you don't understand. We didn't come here for no reason. We don't have a home in the city. We were evicted from our apartment before we even got here. We have nowhere to go back to." "What?" I was stunned by this revelation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because we knew how you would react," Barnaby replied. "You would have started lecturing us about financial responsibility, about how important it is to pay rent on time. But the fact is, we're homeless. And here you have a huge house with plenty of space. A place I bought for myself," I reminded him, "with money I earned over 40 years as a doctor. This is my house, Barnaby." "And we are your family," he exclaimed with sudden anger. "Your flesh and blood. Can't you bear to share it with us?" "I've shared with you your whole life," I replied, feeling anger rising within me. "I paid for your education, which you never finished. I gave you money for the down payment on a car, which you wrecked 2 months later. I helped you rent an apartment, which you still couldn't keep. How much more do I have to give? You're a rich old man. Imogen interrupted, her mask of politeness finally slipping. You have millions in the bank, and we're barely making ends meet. Why are you so selfish? I don't have millions, I replied calmly. I have this house and modest savings for my old age. I'm not going to give you either. Imogen's face contorted with rage. This house is too big for one person. A young family needs it more. What young family? I asked ironically. You're both over 30 and you're not even thinking about children. You're not a young family. You're two adults who can't take responsibility for your own lives. Barnaby jumped up, his face red with anger. You've always been like this. You've always thought I was a failure. You never believed in me. I believed in you, son, I replied sadly. But you disappointed me time and time again. And now by trying to take my house away from me, you're only confirming my opinion of you. Enough, Imogen shouted, banging her fist on the table. We won't put up with this anymore. Winston, this house is ours now. You can pack your things and go to Golden Autumn. We've already signed you up. I looked at her incredulously. You signed me up for a nursing home? Without my consent? You can't do that. This house is mine. I bought it with my own money. Well, technically, Barnaby interjected with an unpleasant smirk, the house is registered in my name. What? I was in shock. What are you talking about? Remember, you signed some documents before buying the house, he continued. One of them was a power of attorney in my name. You didn't even read what you were signing. I remembered that day. Barnaby came to my house with some papers and said they were for insurance. I was busy packing and signed without reading them. Was it really a power of attorney? This is fraud, I said, feeling a chill inside. I'm going to sue you. For what? Barnaby asked with brazen confidence. For an elderly father beginning to suffer from dementia, signing a power of attorney for his only son? Who would believe that you didn't know what you were signing? Especially considering your age and your strange behavior lately. What strange behavior? I protested. Well, for example, you bought a house in the middle of nowhere, far from your family and friends, Imogen chimed in. That could be a sign of early dementia, a desire for isolation, and you've become irritable and suspicious. All the neighbors have noticed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son and his wife were planning to have me declared incompetent so they could take over my house. Get out, I said quietly but firmly. Get out of my house immediately. It's not your house anymore, Dad, Barnaby replied with false sympathy in his voice. And you'd better leave peacefully. We've already called a taxi to take you to Golden Autumn. They're waiting for you there. I'm not going anywhere, I said, feeling my hands tremble with rage. This is my house and you have no right to kick me out. We do, Imogen said, stepping closer, her eyes cold and determined. We have a power of attorney in Barnaby's name. The house is his now, and if you resist, we'll call the police. Go ahead, Warikino, I challenged. Let's see what they say when they find out you obtained the power of attorney fraudulently. Barnaby and Imogen exchanged glances. All right, Barnaby said after a pause. Let's do this. You go to a motel for a couple of days, cool off, and think about our offer. Then we'll all calmly discuss what to do next. I knew they wouldn't back down, and that at the moment I had no proof of their fraud. I needed to buy some time to consult with a lawyer and figure out my chances of getting the house back. Okay, I finally agreed. I'll go away for a couple of days, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up on my house. Of course, Dad. Barnaby patted me on the shoulder with feigned concern. No one's talking about giving up, just a little time out for all of us. I went upstairs and packed the necessary things into a small bag. As I was packing, dozens of thoughts raced through my head. How could they do this to me? How could my own son betray me like this? And what should I do next? When I came downstairs with my bag, Barnaby and Imogen were already waiting for me in the hallway. They looked tense but determined. The taxi will be here in 10 minutes, Barnaby said. We booked a room at the Pine Forest Motel on the outskirts of town. It's quiet and peaceful there. You'll like it. I can book a room myself, I snapped. We just wanted to help, Imogen interjected with the same false concern in her voice that I hated so much. At your age, you shouldn't have to worry about such trifles. I didn't answer, just stood at the door waiting for the taxi. 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Neither of us wanted to start a new round of conflict. When the taxi arrived, Barnaby took my bag and put it in the trunk, like a caring son seeing his father off on a trip. But I saw triumph in his eyes, poorly concealed satisfaction at his victory. "We'll call you in the evening to see how you're settling in," he said as we parted. "Don't bother," I replied, and got into the car. The driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, looked at me questioningly. "To the Pine Forest Motel?" he asked. "No," I replied, looking out the window at Barnaby and Imogen standing on the porch of my house, which they had taken from me. "Take me downtown to Anderson's law office." The taxi pulled away, and I watched my house grow smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. A strange feeling of emptiness and determination came over me. I wasn't going to give up. I wouldn't let them take my house away from me. At Anderson's law office, I was greeted by a young lawyer named Brian, a thin man in his mid-30s with attentive eyes behind his glasses. He listened patiently to my story, taking notes in his notebook. "If I understand correctly, Mr. Pendragon," he said when I finished, "your son obtained power of attorney from you by deception and now claims that the house belongs to him." "That's right," I confirmed. "I never signed any documents transferring the house. Only power of attorney, and even then, I didn't know what I was signing." Brian frowned. "This is a complicated case. The power of attorney does indeed give your son the right to dispose of the property on your behalf. But if you can prove that it was obtained by deception—" "How can I prove that?" I asked desperately. "I have no witnesses, no recording of our conversation. We can try to challenge the power of attorney on the grounds that you were not informed of its contents and consequences," Brian suggested. "We can also file a fraud suit, but I must warn you, it will be a long process." "How long will it take?" "Months, maybe even a year," he replied honestly. "The court system is not known for its speed, especially in family matters." I sighed, realizing that there would be no quick resolution. What should I do in the meantime? I can't go back to my house. They threatened to call the police. "For now, it's best not to escalate the situation," Brian advised. "Find temporary accommodation and let me gather the necessary documents and prepare a lawsuit. We will take legal action." I agreed to his plan, even though I was seething with indignation. We discussed the details, signed a contract for legal services, and I left him copies of all the documents I had with me. After meeting with the lawyer, I drove to the Pine Forest Motel. Not because I wanted to follow Barnaby and Imogen's instructions, but because it was really the only motel in town and I needed a place to stay. The room was small but clean. A bed, a nightstand, a TV, a small table by the window, and a tiny bathroom. It was far from what I was used to, but it was a perfectly suitable place for temporary accommodation. I sat down on the bed feeling strangely empty. Just a few hours ago, I had a home, plans for the future, and the feeling of starting a new life. Now all of that had been destroyed because of the greed and meanness of the people closest to me. My phone rang. "Barnaby." I didn't answer. A minute later, a message came. "Dad, I hope you're settled in. Imogen and I are worried. Call when you're ready to talk." I smiled bitterly. They're worried. After kicking me out of my own home, they have the audacity to say they're worried. I turned off my phone and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts raced through my head about how it had come to this. Where did I go wrong in raising my son? When did he become this kind of person, capable of betrayal for material gain? And what would Ophelia say if she saw what our boy had become? Thoughts of my wife brought a new wave of bitterness. I had tried so hard to fulfill her last request, to take care of Barnaby. But perhaps true care was not about indulging his weaknesses, but about teaching him responsibility and honesty. Maybe I had been too lenient with him for too long. In the evening, I went out to dinner at a small cafe near the motel. An elderly couple was sitting at the next table. They talked quietly, sometimes smiling at each other, holding hands. Looking at them, I felt a sharp pang of envy and loneliness. If Ophelia were alive, things might have turned out differently. She always knew how to restrain the worst aspects of Barnaby's character, and she would never have allowed him to treat me this way. Back in my room, I turned my phone back on. 3 missed calls from Barnaby, 2 from Imogen, and 1 message. "Dad, if you don't answer, we'll have to go to the police. We're worried about your condition." It was a threat disguised as concern. They wanted to continue their game of my supposed mental problems. I decided to respond so as not to give them any unnecessary leverage. I'm fine. I'm staying at a motel. I need time to think about everything that's happened. Please don't bother me. The reply came almost instantly. Okay, Dad, get some rest. We're here if you need us. I smiled bitterly. Hypocrites. They kicked me out of my house, and now they pretend to care about me. Lying in bed, I thought about how I could get my house back. The trial would take months, maybe longer. I couldn't live in a motel that long, but I wasn't going to give up. And then it hit me. The smell of hydrogen sulfide, a feature of the house that Barnaby and Imogen knew about but didn't think much of. Esme said the gas emissions were related to geological activity under the house. What if these emissions became more frequent and stronger? Would Barnaby and Imogen be able to live in a house that constantly smelled like rotten eggs? I remember noticing a crack in the foundation and subsidence at the corner of the house. Maybe these phenomena were related to the gas emissions? If so, I needed to learn more about this phenomenon. Perhaps there was a way to predict or even control these emissions. A plan began to form in my head. I won't rush into a lawsuit. Instead, I'll let Barnaby and Imogen experience all the delights of living in a house above sulfate springs. In the meantime, I'll study this phenomenon and find a way to use it to my advantage. I decided to visit the local library tomorrow and look for information on the geology of sulfur. I would also talk to Esme Belgrave. She surely knows more than she told me when she sold me the house. With this plan in mind, I finally fell asleep, feeling determination replace despair. I will return to my house, whatever it takes. And Barnaby and Imogen will regret deciding to play against me. The week in the motel dragged on painfully slowly. Despite the cleanliness and relative comfort of the room, I felt like a homeless old man, thrown to the side of life by his own son. I slept poorly at night, often waking up at the slightest noise and lying awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events that had led me here in my head. During the day, I tried not to stay inside. I went to the local library where I found several books on the geology of the region. It turned out that sulfur really did get its name from the high sulfur content in the soil and groundwater. The city was built on ancient sulfate deposits, which under certain conditions could release hydrogen sulfide. In one of the books, I read that the activity of sulfate springs depends on many factors: atmospheric pressure, humidity, groundwater, and even the phases of the moon. The frequency of gas emissions could be predicted if enough data were collected and a model created. This knowledge could be useful in my situation. I also visited Esme Belgrave at her office. She was surprised to learn that I no longer lived in the house I had bought. "What happened, Dr. Pendragon?" she asked as we sat in her small office. "Didn't you like the house? Or is it the smell of hydrogen sulfide?" "It's not the house," I replied evasively. "I have some family circumstances. My son and his wife are living there now." "I see," Esme nodded, although I could tell from her expression that she sensed something was left unsaid. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to know more about the gas emissions problem," I said. "How widespread is it in sulfur? And are there ways to predict or control these emissions?" Esme tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. "That's an interesting question. You see, the problem does exist, but most locals are used to it. In your house, the situation is a little more complicated because of its location. It stands directly above one of the old sulfate pockets." "Pockets?" I asked. "Yes, that's what we call the places where sulfate deposits accumulate. They're like bubbles under the ground. When the pressure inside them becomes too high, gas is released, usually through cracks in the ground or the foundations of buildings." "And how often does this happen?" "In your case, I would say once every 2 to 3 weeks, but the frequency can vary depending on the season. In spring, when there is a lot of rain and the ground is saturated with moisture, the emissions are more frequent." I nodded, memorizing the information. "Are there any ways to control this phenomenon?" Esme looked at me curiously. "Why do you need to know if you no longer live in the house?" "Just curious," I replied as casually as possible. "I might go back there later." Esme didn't seem to believe my explanation, but she continued anyway. "There are special ventilation systems that are installed in the basements of houses in our region. They remove the gases to a safe place, but it's quite expensive and not always effective. It's easier to just air out the house when the smell appears. Is there any way to increase the emissions? I asked, trying to make the question sound as innocent as possible. I mean, are there factors that provoke more active gas release? Esme frowned. Why do you need to know this, Dr. Pendragon? Usually people want to reduce emissions, not increase them. I realized I had crossed the line of curiosity and hastened to explain. I'm just trying to understand the nature of this phenomenon. As a doctor, I have always been interested in natural processes. Esme seemed satisfied with this explanation, although she still looked slightly suspicious. Well, if you're really interested, emissions increase when atmospheric pressure drops, during rainfall, when groundwater rises, and with certain types of vibrations, for example, from construction work near the house. I thanked Esme for the information and left, pondering what I had learned. So hydrogen sulfide emissions could be predicted and even indirectly controlled. This information could be my trump card in the game against Barnaby and Imogen. That same day, I went to the local hardware store and bought a barometer to track changes in atmospheric pressure. According to Esme's information, strong gas emissions should occur when the pressure drops, especially before rain. Sure enough, on the 5th day of my stay at the motel, the barometer showed a sharp drop in pressure. Clouds were gathering in the sky, heralding rain. I decided to test my theory and took a taxi to drive past the house. Without going inside, I just wanted to see if there were any signs of increased gas emissions. As I drove by, I noticed the windows wide open, despite the rain that was starting to fall. This could only mean one thing. Barnaby and Imogen were trying to get rid of the smell of hydrogen sulfide, which had probably become particularly strong. I returned to the motel with a sense of grim satisfaction. My plan was starting to work even without my active participation. Nature itself was helping me get my house back. The next day, exactly 1 week after my expulsion, the phone rang. Barnaby's name lit up on the screen. I hesitated whether to answer or not, but curiosity got the better of me. Yes, I replied in a neutral tone. Dad, Barnaby's voice sounded tense, even frightened. We have a problem with the house. What kind of problem? I asked, trying to hide my satisfaction. The smell. It's become unbearable. The whole house smells like rotten eggs. We can't sleep or eat properly. Imogen has started having migraines. She feels sick. What's wrong with this house? I told you about the gas emissions from under the house, I reminded him. It's a feature of the area. The house stands on top of sulfate deposits that periodically release hydrogen sulfide. But not to this extent, Barnaby exclaimed desperately. The smell appeared the day before yesterday and doesn't go away. Even when we air out the house, it's unbearable. That's strange, I said with feigned surprise. During the time I lived there, the smell was never that strong. Maybe you just got used to it, Barnaby suggested. Or is it the house reacting to the new tenants? I could barely contain my laughter. My son, who was usually so rational, was starting to believe in supernatural explanations. I doubt that houses can react to their occupants, I replied dryly. Most likely it's related to the weather. Have you noticed that the smell gets stronger after it rains? Yes, exactly then, Barnaby confirmed. But why? And what should we do? It's a scientific fact. When it rains, the groundwater rises, putting pressure on the sulfate deposits, which release more gas, I explained. As for solving the problem, you can install a special ventilation system in the basement. It will remove the gases from the house. And how much will that cost? Barnaby asked suspiciously. I think at least $10,000, I replied, deliberately exaggerating the amount. But it's the only effective way to deal with the problem. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. We don't have that kind of money, Barnaby finally said. Maybe you could pay for the installation of a ventilation system in the house you took from me? I interrupted him ironically. I don't think that's fair. Dad, don't start again. Barnaby's voice became irritated. We didn't take your house away from you. We just wanted you to live in a more suitable place. In a nursing home, I clarified. In a residence for active retirees, he exclaimed. That's completely different. You'd be better off there than in this poisoned house. If the house is so poisoned, why do you live in it? I asked logically. Why don't you move back to the city? Because we don't have anywhere else to live. You know that. Barnaby almost shouted. We were evicted from our apartment. We don't have the money to rent a new one. And I don't have another home, I countered. But for some reason, you decided you could just kick me out. There was another pause. I could hear Barnaby breathing heavily, trying to control his emotions. Dad, please. His voice became pleading. Help us solve this problem. We can't live like this. I can help, I said after a short pause, but on certain conditions. What conditions? Barnaby asked warily. You give me back the house, I replied firmly. I'll install a ventilation system and solve the odor problem, and you find yourselves another place to live. That's blackmail, Barnaby protested. No, it's justice, I replied calmly. I bought the house for myself with my own money. You took it from me by deception. Now you have problems, and you want me to solve them without getting anything in return? That's not how it works, son. Barnaby sighed, and I heard him move away from the phone and start talking to someone. Imogen, apparently. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out the intonations of an argument. A minute later, Barnaby returned to the phone. We can't accept your terms, he said tensely. We'll find another way to solve the odor problem. As you wish, I replied indifferently. Good luck. I hung up, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and satisfaction. Disappointment because Barnaby still refused to admit he was wrong and give me back my house. Satisfaction because my plan was starting to work. The smell of hydrogen sulfide was making their life in the house unbearable. Sooner or later, they would give in. That evening, Imogen called me. Her usually confident voice sounded frightened. Winston, this isn't funny anymore, she said instead of saying hello. Something strange is happening in the house. What are you talking about? I asked, feigning ignorance. The smell is getting stronger, she replied in a trembling voice. And now there are these sounds. What sounds? I was genuinely surprised, as I knew of no sounds associated with gas emissions. It's like the house is sighing or moaning, especially at night. It's as if someone is walking around the basement and breathing heavily. In the ground in the garden, it's sinking in some places. It's as if there are cavities forming under the house. Now I was truly puzzled. I knew about the possible subsidence of the soil. I had seen a small crack in the foundation even before I was kicked out. But the sounds? That was something new. Perhaps it's related to geological activity, I suggested. Sulfate deposits can shift, creating voids under the house. That explains both the subsidence and the strange noises. So it's not ghosts or anything like that? Imogen's voice sounded genuinely relieved when I offered a scientific explanation. I could barely contain my laughter. Imogen, always so practical and cynical, now believed in ghosts. I don't think there are ghosts in the house, I said seriously. But geological processes can be just as dangerous. If voids form under the house, the foundation could sink or even collapse. Collapse? Gekantun, her voice took on a panicked tone. Are you saying the house could collapse? Theoretically, yes, I replied, enjoying her fear. But I don't think it will happen anytime soon. Most likely the process will be gradual. First, cracks will appear in the walls. Then the doorways will warp. It will become difficult to open the windows. We already have a crack in the bedroom wall, Imogen interrupted me. And the bathroom door stopped closing properly. It was unexpected. I didn't think the destruction would happen so quickly. In that case, you should have the house inspected by a specialist, I advised, a structural engineer or a geologist. They will be able to assess the degree of danger. And you, could you come and take a look? Imogen asked unexpectedly. You used to live here. Maybe you'll notice something unusual. I thought about it. On the one hand, it was a great chance to return to the house and assess the situation with my own eyes. On the other hand, I didn't want to give them false hope of reconciliation. All right, I finally agreed. I'll come tomorrow morning. But keep in mind, I'm not a construction or geology expert. I can only share my observations. Thank you, Winston. Imogen's voice sounded sincerely grateful. We'll be waiting. After talking to Imogen, I couldn't calm down for a long time. The situation was developing faster and more dramatically than I had expected. I wanted to scare Barnaby and Imogen with the smell of hydrogen sulfide so that they would voluntarily return the house to me. But if the building was really collapsing due to geological activity, that was a different story. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, not even those who had treated me so badly. The next morning, I went to the house. It was a cloudy day with a light drizzle, creating an atmosphere of anxiety and gloom. When the taxi pulled up to my former home, I was struck by how much it had changed in the week I had been away. The house looked abandoned. The windows were dirty, the paint on the porch was peeling, and the garden was littered with trash and fallen leaves that no one had bothered to clean up. Barnaby opened the door without waiting for me to ring the bell. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, pale face, nervous gaze. The smell of hydrogen sulfide hit my nose as soon as I crossed the threshold. It was so strong that I instinctively covered my nose with my hand. "We're used to it now," Barnaby said, noticing my reaction. "Or rather, we've come to terms with it. Although it's always worse in the mornings." Imogen was waiting for us in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, even though the house was quite warm. Her eyes were haunted, her face etched with suffering. "Thank you for coming," she said in a weak voice. "We don't know what to do." I looked around the living room. At first glance, everything seemed fine. But upon closer inspection, I noticed a thin crack running across the wall from floor to ceiling. "When did this crack appear?" I asked, pointing to it. "3 days ago," Barnaby replied. "At first it was barely noticeable, but it's getting wider every day." I moved closer and ran my finger along the crack. It was deep and ran not only through the plaster, but also through the wall itself. It was more serious than I had thought. "Show me the rest of the problems," I asked. They led me around the house, showing me all the changes that had occurred over the past week. Cracks in the bedroom walls, a warped bathroom door, windows that didn't close properly. In the basement, most alarming of all, small depressions had appeared in the floor, as if the concrete was sinking in some places. "What about the noises?" I asked, remembering Imogen's words about strange moans. "They start at night," she replied, rubbing her hands nervously. "At first they're quiet, as if someone is whispering under the floor. Then they get louder, like moans. And sometimes I think I hear a voice." "A voice?" I asked incredulously. "Yes," she confirmed, looking me straight in the eye. "A woman's voice. It's calling someone. I can't make out the name, but it's definitely a call." I looked at Barnaby, expecting him to refute his wife's fantasies, but he just nodded. "I've heard it too," he admitted. "Not as clearly as Imogen, but there is something. And it's not the wind or the creaking of wood or pipes. It sounds like a voice." I felt uneasy. I could explain the cracks in the walls and the sagging floor with geological processes. But voices? That was beyond rational explanation. "Maybe it's an acoustic effect," I suggested, not wanting to admit the presence of something supernatural. The sound of wind or water in the pipes can be distorted by the voids under the house and sound like a voice. Imogen shook her head. "I know what wind or water in pipes sounds like. This is different. It's creepy." We returned to the living room and sat down at the table. The smell of hydrogen sulfide grew stronger, and I felt slightly dizzy. "What should we do, Dad?" Barnaby asked, his voice tinged with a childlike helplessness I hadn't heard in years. "We can't live like this. Imogen is constantly nauseous. I have headaches. And now the house is falling apart." I looked at my son and his wife, exhausted, frightened, their usual self-confidence gone. Part of me wanted to revel in their suffering, to see it as just desserts for how they had treated me. But another part, the part that was still a doctor, a man who had taken an oath to do no harm, was concerned about their health. "You need to leave this house," I said seriously, "at least for a while. Hydrogen sulfide in such concentrations is harmful to health. It can cause not only headaches and nausea, but also more serious problems with prolonged exposure." "But where can we go?" Imogen asked desperately. "We don't have the money to rent another place." "You can give me the house back," I suggested again. "I know how to deal with the hydrogen sulfide problem and can stop the building from deteriorating. And you'll receive enough compensation to rent an apartment in the city for several months." Barnaby and Imogen exchanged glances. I could see the internal struggle in their eyes. Pride versus fear, greed versus common sense. "We'll think about it," Barnaby finally said. "But even if we agree, how do you plan to solve these problems? The smell, the damage, those eerie sounds?" "I have a plan," I replied confidently. "But I'll only share it after you give me back my house. Officially through a notary." "That's not fair," exclaimed Imogen. "You want us to just take your word for it? Did you expect honesty after you fraudulently obtained power of attorney and kicked me out of my own house?" I retorted. "I'm offering you a solution that benefits everyone. You give me back my house and get money for a rental apartment. I solve the problems with the house and regain my legal property. Everyone wins." "We need to think about it," Barnaby repeated. "Can you give us a couple of days?" "Of course," I agreed, "but don't drag it out. Judging by the rate of deterioration, the house may become uninhabitable in the coming weeks." I stood up, ready to leave. As I left, I glanced around the living room, noting how much my house had changed in such a short time. It seemed to have aged, faded, lost its appeal, just like the people who now lived in it. "Call me when you've made a decision," I said, heading for the door. "Dad," Barnaby called after me as I reached the threshold, "do you really know how to solve these problems? Or do you just want the house back?" I looked at my son, weighing my words. "I do know a way to reduce the hydrogen sulfide emissions and stop the house from deteriorating," I replied honestly. "But yes, I also want to get back what is rightfully mine." With that, I left the house and headed for the taxi waiting for me. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror at my house slowly disappearing in the mist of rain, and I knew I would be back soon. Now it was just a matter of time. The day after my visit to the house, Barnaby called with the answer I had already anticipated. "We can't just give you the house, Dad," he said firmly, although there was uncertainty in his voice. "We've invested too much in it." "Invested?" I asked ironically. "You've lived there less than a month. What exactly have you invested?" "Not just money, but emotional attachment," Barnaby replied, clearly searching for words. "Besides, we've already found a solution to the problem." "Really?" I was genuinely surprised. "And what is it?" "We found a company that specializes in air purification. They install special filters and odor neutralizers. They promise to solve the problem in 3 days." I could barely contain my laughter. Filters and odor neutralizers won't solve the problem of hydrogen sulfide emissions from under the house. It's like treating the symptoms of a disease without addressing its cause. "And how much do their services cost?" I asked. $2,000, Barnaby replied proudly. "We've already made the prepayment. They're starting work tomorrow." "Well, good luck," I said, knowing that disappointment awaited them. "But what about the cracks in the walls and the sagging floor? Filters won't fix that." "We're working on it," Barnaby replied vaguely. "Imogen has a builder friend who promised to look at the house next week." "I see," I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Well, as I said, good luck. But if these measures don't help, my offer still stands." After talking to Barnaby, I decided to take more action. I visited the city library again, this time focusing on technical literature on ventilation and gas removal. I also studied local homeowner forums where similar problems were discussed. It turned out that there were several companies in Salford and the surrounding area that specialized in solving hydrogen sulfide problems. They installed not just filters, but complex ventilation systems that removed gases from under the house through special pipes that extended well above the roof. Such systems were really expensive, about $10,000 as I told Barnaby, but they solved the problem permanently rather than temporarily masking it. I decided to contact one of these companies, Sulfurvent, which had the best reviews. I wasn't planning on ordering their services yet. I just wanted to get more information about the technology and possible solutions specifically for my house. The consultant, named Hugh, was very knowledgeable and pleasant to talk to. He explained how their system worked and even offered to meet to discuss the details as they applied to my case. "But I don't live in the house right now," I explained the situation without going into family details. "My son and his wife live there. They are trying to solve the problem with filters and odor neutralizers." Hugh laughed. "That's like treating cancer with aspirin. It may help with the symptoms for a while, but the disease isn't going anywhere. The hydrogen sulfide problem in sulfur is a geological phenomenon. The gas will continue to come from underground as long as there are sulfate deposits, and they've been there for thousands of years and aren't going anywhere. So, without a proper ventilation system, the problem can't be solved?" I asked. "Absolutely," Hugh confirmed. "And the longer they ignore the real solution, the worse the situation will get. Hydrogen sulfide not only smells bad, it corrodes the concrete foundation, metal structures, and even wooden beams. The house is literally being destroyed from the inside. This information confirmed my fears. I thanked Hugh and took his business card, promising to contact him when I was ready to have the system installed. 3 days later, Imogen called me. Her voice sounded tired and depressed. "Winston, these air purification specialists, they're complete charlatans," she said without preamble. "They installed some filters and sprayed air fresheners, took $2,000 and left. The smell disappeared for a couple of hours, then came back with a vengeance." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "As I said, the problem isn't the air inside the house, it's the gases coming up from the ground. Filters are useless here." "What should we do, Winston?" Her voice sounded openly desperate. "Barnaby is sick. He has constant headaches, nausea, breathing problems. The doctor said it could be related to hydrogen sulfide. I'm getting worse every day too. The smell, it's everywhere. In my clothes, in my hair, even in my food." I felt a pang of conscience. I didn't want them to get seriously ill because of my plan. "You need to leave the house," I said seriously. "Hydrogen sulfide is toxic in high concentrations. It can cause irreversible damage to your health." "But where can we go?" Imogen's voice trembled. "We don't have money for a hotel or a rental apartment. We spent our last savings on those quacks with their filters." "My offers still stand," I reminded her. "Give me back the house, and I'll give you money for rent." There was a pause. I could hear Imogen breathing heavily, as if gathering strength for an important decision. I'll talk to Barnaby," she finally said. "But he's very stubborn, you know, and proud. He doesn't want to admit we were wrong." "It's not about mistakes or admissions," I replied gently. "It's about your health. Tell him I don't hold a grudge. I just want everything to go back to the way it was. The house for me, and for you, a chance to start over, without these hydrogen sulfide problems and the crumbling building." "I'll pass that on," Imogen promised and hung up. I spent the next few days doing intensive research. I studied all the available information on ventilation systems for houses with hydrogen sulfide problems. I consulted with Hugh from SulfurVent about specific technical solutions for my house. I even contacted a geologist specializing in sulfate deposits to better understand the nature of the problem. Gradually, I developed a clear plan of action. I knew I would need to install a ventilation system that would remove gases from under the house, preventing them from accumulating and putting pressure on the foundation. I would also need to reinforce the foundation and repair the cracks that had already appeared. The work ahead was extensive and expensive, but I was willing to invest in it to get my house back and make it safe to live in. About a week after my conversation with Imogen, Barnaby called me. His voice was weak, barely audible. "Dad," he said, and I could hear how difficult it was for him to speak. "We're giving up. The house is yours. We can't stay here anymore. I'm in the hospital with hydrogen sulfide poisoning. Imogen has moved in with her sister." I felt mixed emotions. Relief that I would finally get my house back, and concern for my son's health. "How serious is it?" I asked. "The doctors say I'll recover, but it will take time," Barnaby replied bitterly. "They've never seen such severe hydrogen sulfide poisoning. They said I could have died if I had stayed in the house for a few more days." I was overcome with guilt. I wanted them to move out, but I didn't want anyone to get seriously hurt. "I'm sorry it turned out this way," I said sincerely. "When you're discharged from the hospital, we'll meet at the notary and make everything official. In the meantime, I'll transfer the money for the apartment rent to you, as promised." "Thank you," Barnaby replied quietly. "And I'm sorry. We were wrong to try to take your house away from you." It was the first real apology from my son in all the years of his antics and manipulations. I was so surprised that I didn't know how to respond right away. "I apologize too," I finally said, "for not warning you about the danger of hydrogen sulfide. I knew it could be harmful, but I didn't think it would be this bad." "You tried to warn us," Barnaby replied. "We just didn't listen, as usual." We were silent for a moment, each thinking our own thoughts. Then Barnaby continued, "I realized something while I was lying here hooked up to oxygen. All my life I've been waiting for you to solve my problems. At first it was okay. I was a kid. But then I grew up and I was still waiting for someone else to take responsibility for my life. That's not right." I was touched by this sudden insight. Maybe his illness really had made him see life differently. It's never too late to change, I said gently. I believe you can get back on your feet and turn your life around. Without your help, Barnaby added, and there was a new determination in his voice. I have to do it myself. Imogen and I have decided to move to another city, to start with a clean slate, where no one knows our history and there is no temptation to ask our parents for help. I felt a strange sense of relief at these words. Of course, I will miss my son, but perhaps this is really the best solution for both of us. The distance will help us build a healthier relationship, or at least not hurt each other even more. I understand, I said, and I respect your decision. But know that if you need advice or just want to talk, I'll always be on the other end of the phone. Thanks, Dad. Barnaby's voice sounded sincere. I have to go. The nurse is here to give me my shot. I'll contact you when I'm discharged to sort out the house. Get well, I said and hung up. After talking to my son, I immediately called Hugh from Salfervent and arranged to meet him the next day to inspect the house and start work on the ventilation system. I also contacted a construction company that specialized in foundation repairs. I decided to act quickly to stop the house from falling apart. When I arrived at the house the next day with Hugh, I was struck by how much everything had changed during the time I had not lived there. The paint on the exterior walls was cracked and peeling in places. The wooden elements of the porch had darkened and looked rotten. In the garden, the ground had subsided in several places, forming small pits. Inside the house, the smell of hydrogen sulfide was so strong that Hugh immediately put on a respirator and advised me to do the same. This is one of the worst cases I have ever seen, he said, inspecting the basement. The concentration of gas here is life-threatening. No wonder your son ended up in the hospital. He showed me the places where gas was actively escaping from cracks in the floor. Using a special device, he measured the concentration of hydrogen sulfide. It was significantly higher than the permissible level. We can install a system that will solve the problem, Hugh said as we went upstairs and stepped out into the fresh air. But it will take time, and the house needs serious repairs. Cracks in the foundation, sagging floors. All of this needs to be fixed before installing ventilation. How long will the whole job take? I asked. 2 to 3 months, Hugh replied, and you won't be able to live in the house during that time. The gas concentration is too high. I nodded, accepting this information. I was prepared for the fact that restoring the house would take time and require a significant investment. Prepare a work plan and estimate, I asked. I want to start as soon as possible. A week later, Barnaby was discharged from the hospital and we met at the notary's office. He still looked pale and weak, but there was a new look in his eyes, more aware, more mature. The procedure was quick. Barnaby revoked the power of attorney and signed the documents confirming that the house belonged to me. I, in turn, transferred him enough money to rent an apartment for 6 months and cover some of his medical expenses. When the official part was over, we went outside. It was a warm autumn day. The sun was shining softly, creating a feeling of peace and new beginnings. What are you going to do with the house? Barnaby asked when we stopped at his car. It's practically uninhabitable. I've hired specialists to solve the hydrogen sulfide problem, I replied. It will take a few months, but then I'll be able to go back there. Barnaby looked at me in surprise. Do you really want to live in that house? After everything that happened there? Yes, I nodded. It's my home, the place I chose for myself. The hydrogen sulfide problem can be solved with proper ventilation. And all the rest? The memories. Well, they're part of my life too. We were silent for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Barnaby held out his hand to me. Goodbye, Dad. I hope you'll be happy in your house. I shook his hand, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Goodbye, son. Good luck to you and Imogen in your new home. He nodded, got into his car, and drove away. I watched the car recede into the distance, knowing that I would probably not see my son for a very long time, perhaps never again. But I felt no bitterness or regret, only acceptance and quiet calm. We had both made our choices and now had to live with the consequences. Work on restoring the house began the next day. I moved into a temporary apartment in Salford to oversee the process. Every day I came to the construction site, watched the workers reinforce the foundation, fill in the cracks, and install a complex ventilation system. Hugh turned out to be a real professional. He developed a plan that not only solved the hydrogen sulfide problem, but also turned it into an advantage. The gas was diverted through special pipes to a small technical outbuilding in the garden, where a chemical process converted it into useful compounds that could be used as fertilizer. Sulfur is an excellent fertilizer for many plants, Hugh explained to me, especially for berries and flowers. You'll have the most lush garden in all of Salford. The renovation took almost 4 months, longer than originally expected, as additional problems were discovered during the process. But the result exceeded all expectations. The house was not just restored, it was renovated, made stronger and safer than it was before. When I finally returned to my home, it looked almost like new. Fresh paint, a repaired porch, reinforced foundations, and no smell of hydrogen sulfide. The ventilation system worked perfectly. On my first night in the restored house, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house, waiting to hear those strange moans and whispers that Barnaby and Imogen had talked about. But all I heard were the usual sounds: the creaking of the floorboards, the rustling of leaves outside the window, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The house seemed to come alive, freed from the toxic gas and toxic relationships that had filled it before. In the morning, I went out into the garden with a cup of coffee and looked around. Now that the hydrogen sulfide problem had been solved, I could focus on improving the grounds. Plant flowers, maybe fruit trees. Create the cozy corner I had dreamed of when I bought this house. There was no news from Barnaby. He kept his word and really started a new life without my help. Sometimes I thought about him, hoping he was doing well, that he had learned from our history, but I didn't try to contact him. We both needed this distance, this time apart. I started a new chapter in my life. I got a dog, a golden retriever from a shelter, not young and calm like myself. I took up gardening, using fertilizers made from hydrogen sulfide. I renewed old friendships and made new ones in Salford. The house that had almost caused a permanent rift with my son became a place of peace and harmony. A place where I could finally be myself, without having to live up to anyone's expectations or take responsibility for other people's mistakes. Sometimes, sitting on the porch on warm evenings, I thought about Ophelia, about what she would say if she saw how Barnaby and I's fate had turned out. Would she be upset, angry, or would she understand that sometimes distance is the only way to preserve love and respect for each other? I didn't know the answer to that question, but I was sure that for the first time in a long time, I had done the right thing, not only for myself, but also for my son. I had finally allowed him to grow up and take responsibility for his own life, and I had allowed myself to live for myself, without the guilt and obligations that had weighed on me for so long. My house above the sulfate spring became a symbol of this new life, a place where problems are not ignored but solved, where natural features are not denied but accepted and even turned into advantages, where there is room only for those people and relationships that bring joy and peace, not stress and disappointment. And there was a certain justice in this, a certain harmony. Just as there was in the fact that the house that Barnaby and Imogen so desperately wanted to take away from me rejected them, protecting its true owner. It was like an old fairy tale, where evil intentions turn against the villains, and good and justice ultimately triumph.